Developing good alternatives for yourself is going to really bolster your negotiation position. It's also going to increase your confidence tremendously in the negotiation process, okay? So one thing you can do is to simply imagine the worst case scenario. What's the worst case scenario? If I don't get this deal, if I don't get the number that I'm looking for, what's the absolute worst that could happen, right? Ideally, what you really want to do is you want to be actively building up other alternatives that are as attractive or possibly even more attractive than the negotiation outcome itself. It's called a BATNA, right? Best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Okay, some of you are probably familiar with that term. And it's an alternative to a negotiated agreement specifically, right? So it's not like a bottom line. Like I want 100,000, but I'll settle for 80,000. So 80,000 is the rock bottom, least amount that I will accept. It's not that, because that's still in the context of a negotiation, right? So the BATNA is a completely separate option. So if I don't get this 100,000 that I'm going for, or something close to it, then my alternative is I have another job offer over here from another company, right? Which may be a higher pay, but it also maybe it's the same pay or less pay, but it's better hours, it's more flexible, whatever the case may be, right? So that's your BATNA. Everybody needs to be developing alternatives all the time, right? Because if you're not developing alternatives, then you're going in weaker into the negotiation process, and you're also feeling more defensive, right? So that's going to prevent you from developing that great win-win mutual benefit dynamic, which is what you're really going for, right? But if you go in strong, then either number one, you're stronger than the other party, which is always good, or number two, you're at least relatively on equal footing with them. And so it's much easier to have a mutually beneficial negotiation than if you're going in a much weaker position, okay? So in the case of employees, the BATNA, the alternative, is simply a question of putting yourself out there, making yourself available to other companies to get other offers. I actually had a client maybe about 2 years ago, and he had a really interesting strategy. He would go on a job interview 2 or 3 times a month, like a different job interview 2 or 3 times a month, even though he had a full-time job. So he was constantly in the game, constantly in the mix. He was working in the tech industry, which is very skill focused, right? So there's a lot of skills that are necessary as far as coding and programming, all that kind of stuff. And the skills are constantly changing because it's a rapidly changing industry. So just by going on these interviews frequently, he was keeping his skills sharp. He was keeping his finger on the pulse of what the industry is demanding currently. Very different approach from what most people do. Most people, they get a secure job and they say, okay, got it, phew, now I can relax. And 5 years later, the company downsizes or the company goes under because the economy has moved on, they get laid off or they get kicked out, and then they're stuck, right? They're in an economy where their skills are now obsolete. And unfortunately, there's tons of people in the country right now that are in this situation. They did not develop alternatives, right? They did not actively build up their alternatives. So it's very important, if you're an employee and you're trying to build your career and have a good, foundation for yourself, very important to get a lot of good alternatives going. In the case of a business, it's very simple. It's even simpler. It's just generating prospects, making sure your pipeline is filled all the time. As a small business owner myself, I understand the importance of just always being out there, generating leads, generating prospects, right? Whatever the strategy is, your strategy might be cold calling, your strategy might be networking events, it might be referrals, whatever it might be, the point is that you got to get those alternatives going. If you have good alternatives, then you will be able to, you're going to be strong in the negotiation. So as a business owner, I know if I meet with somebody and I'm trying to close a deal, if I don't close the deal, I'll still be able to eat that month. I'll still be able to keep the lights on. It's not absolutely critical. It's when your back is against the wall that you start making foolish decisions and you start behaving erratically and you start getting bad negotiation outcomes. But if I have a whole big roster, a whole bench of potential prospects behind this one prospect, if this deal goes south, it's okay. I still have other options.